Good afternoon. Hey, y'all. Thanks for coming out. If you're still getting your snacks, don't worry. You're not going to miss anything. Thank you all very much for being here today. I want to also say thanks to the Faculty Speakers Committee for their ongoing support of the David Clewell Visiting Writer Series at Webster University. Thanks to Sustainability Studies for co-sponsoring Allegra's visit today. Thanks to the Novel Neighbor, the official bookseller of the David Clewell Visiting Writer Series. They're here. They've got their table set up outside. So, hey, buy books. Right? And of course, a deep and generous and abiding thank you to our donors, right, who have been so kind and generous with their gifts. It's a real honor to help curate this series, and which is named, as you know, for our old friend and teacher and mentor. And we hope always to reward the trust placed in us by our donors to bring these outstanding writers to campus, to meet with our students and to read for us. So thank you to everyone who is who's given to the series. And if you'd like to be one of those donors, I'd be happy to tell you how after the reading. So just come see me. So I'm thrilled to have Allegra Hyde here today. She's been a writer on my mind for the series since we started this thing. And the stars aligned this semester when Carla Armbruster was teaching her ecofeminism and environmental justice class at the same time that I was teaching topics in fiction. And it's worked out great. This morning, we brought those two classes together for a really great conversation about the environment and writing and environmental writing and weaving and caves and Missouri's primacy in cave space in the United States. So it was good. And yesterday, Allegra met with a couple of our top creative writing majors to talk about their work. So again, thank you to everyone who helps to make these visits possible. And thanks, of course, to Allegra for coming. Allegra Hyde is the author of 3 books, starting with 2016's Of This New World, winner of the John Simmons Short Fiction Prize from the University of Iowa. 2022 brought Allegra's debut novel, Eleutheria, which was named a Best Book of the Year by The New Yorker, and which established her in the forefront of American fiction writers on climate change. Although, let me say, to say Eleutheria is about climate change is kind of like saying Mrs. Dalloway is about a cocktail party. It's true, but there's more. And last year, Allegra published her remarkable new book, The Last Catastrophe, an editor's choice selection by the New York Times, named a Best Story Collection of the Year by the Chicago Review of Books, Electric Lit, and Our Culture magazine, and a Best LGBTQ+ Book of the Year by them.us. To read Allegra's work, right, is to marvel at the capacity of her imagination, at this wonderful alchemy that blends speculative fiction and historical fiction and climate fiction and satire and tragicomedy and mystery and love story. I love writers who teach me things, and I always learn something when I read Allegra's work. Research is a big part of what she does, but her stories wear that research so precisely, right? And the first thing that I fell in love with about Allegra's work was the sound that it makes on the page, right? And I'm still hearing that sound, this absolutely gorgeous prose style that communicates so much substance. And one of the things that fiction writers will tell you, if you get them in the right mood, right, is that they really do sort of write the same story over and over again. The trick is to not make it read like that, right? And in addition to, and in a lot of ways, because of the epically important subject of climate change that drives so much of her work. One of the other stories that Allegra tells, it seems to me, is how hard, how tragically and hilariously and absurdly hard it can be to just do the right thing in this world that we've fashioned for ourselves. This fiction tells us that the future begins in and depends on all of our capacities to imagine new and better ways to live. This is vital, prophetic, and yet deeply hopeful fiction. Right? And I want you to hear some of it now. So please welcome Allegra Hyde.
The challenge of getting such a generous introduction is that then you have to try to live up to it. And I'm gonna try. But let me start by saying that I'm so grateful to be here. This is my first time in St. Louis, and it's been fun so far. Now that I know that this is the to-go place for caves, I'm pretty sure I will be back because as has kind of been said, artists, writers, we get obsessed with things, and those obsessions are so often what drive our work. And I think having those obsessions and chasing them is one of the great pleasures of making work. As Murray said, artists also oftentimes kind of write the same story or explore the same material over and over again. And I have been kind of over the years continuing to return to the question of what do we do in a world that feels like it's falling apart? How do we act? And what does it mean to step away from mainstream society and to try to do something a little bit different? And that's the big question that I was exploring in my first novel, in Eleutheria. It's a book about a young woman named Willa Marks who decides to join a eco compound in the Bahamas in an effort to save the world from climate change. Do things go well? Maybe, maybe not. But I'm going to start by reading just a little bit from the novel to give you a sense of this person and a taste of her journey of trying to figure out how to live up to your own ideals in a complicated world. I'm also a big hydrator, so I'm maybe sipping a lot of water. All right, here we go. My full name is Willa Marks. There's nothing in the middle. My parents must have had their reasons for the omission, though I've always considered a sign of honesty. A middle name can lurk in a person like a bomb, a secret identity poised to pop off. I'm simply me. What I'm trying to say is I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't have time to tell you anything else. And it's important for you to hear the truth because what has been said about Camp Hope, about me, is a shadow of what really happened. Let me start with the easy parts. I was 22 when I boarded a plane and flew to Eleutheria. I was drunk on ideas. I was so drunk, in fact, that when the turboprop shuddered into a nosedive, cabin lights flickering, pilot crackling over the intercom, my limbs remained limp. While the other passengers hunched in their seats, prayers on their lips, I kept my eyes open, savoring the rush of arrival, the jarring smack of it reverberating through me. The turboprop did not land elegantly, but it landed intact. Even so, had the plane crashed onto the island, I'd still have walked out of the wreckage beatific. I'd been awake the length of a day, a night, but that had not yet become a problem. I was the kind of person who took exhaustion in stride, let it warp my surroundings into dreamscapes, and So far, everything had gone right. Out the airplane window, palm trees, a heat-seared tarmac, men in orange vests strolling from the steel maw of a rusted aircraft hangar. Around me, a dozen other passengers unbuckled their seatbelts. Some smiled relievedly, others wiped away tears. A woman's purse had spilled into the aisle, and I helped her collect her things, though I curbed my impulse to ask if she was from Eleutheria. To get caught in conversation might break whatever spell had whisked me from Boston to the Bahamas, a spell meant to carry me on to Camp Hope. I wanted to arrive unimpeded, unburdened, slick as a fish released into the sea. If I could have, I would have traveled to the island naked. As it was, my backpack contained only a change of clothes, a passport, 65 US dollars, and my well-thumbed copy of Living the Solution, the official Camp Hope guide to transforming ourselves and saving the planet. I had the envelope as well, the one from Sylvia, but I tried not to think about it. What I thought about was Camp Hope, specifically about arriving at Camp Hope and making my life mean something. I'm going to jump ahead so that we learn a little bit more about Camp Hope. By design, Camp Hope did not have a web presence or a public presence of any kind. Everything I knew about it came from Living the Solution, a book I had encountered under unusual circumstances and technically not been meant to see. There was, however, an abundance of information about the book's author, Roy H. Adams. A military man, for years he had basked in the computer screen of command centers and the adulation of joystick warriors. His approval one link in the kill chain that turned foreign villages to dust. In photos online, he stood in front of American flags, his hair razor cut, his square jaw set, his eyes flinty. He looked like a man who expected his steaks rare and his golf courses pesticide drenched. A man who believed he was entitled to all that he touched. And yet, that same Adams had written in Living the Solution about giving up his military career, his marriage as well. Such sacrifices, he explained, were a small price to pay in the war against climate change, a war for humanity's very survival. We'd been losing that war. There'd been decades of environmental marches and bumper stickers, special light bulbs and bike racks, sit-ins and die-ins and speeches, NGOs and IGOs and NPDESs and panic scientific studies. And for what? Torrential rain spurred landslides in China, smothered whole cities. Spore-laced dust storms forced mass evacuations in Australia. There were ongoing food shortages, a drought squeezing Brazilian soy, a wheat blight hitting Russia, along with the desperation brewing on the force of that hunger. Boat people, pundits called the hundreds of thousands of refugees floating from coast to coast, begging for the right to dock, begging for scraps, dying, bodies washing up along the Bay of Bengal on the flooded plazas of Barcelona. Americans looked on with ephemeral pity, the tragedy ever seeming elsewhere, acute or temporal, even as wildfires seared the West and toxic algae bloomed in the Great Lakes. We were moored in apathy, in the comfort of willful blindness, even as CO2 levels ticked upward and glaciers sweated smaller and entire ecosystems collapsed. The average environmentalist, according to Adams, only whimpered, equivocated, begged for corporate salvation, gave into the ease of greenwashing, the capitalist diversion epitomized in reusable shopping bags. Keep on spending. In America, we still had our guns, our flags, our stranglehold on exceptionalism. We still had the distraction of virtual realities, the Hollywood phantasmagoria, the pharmaceutical raft of painlessness. We still had the audacity to call climate change a problem for another time, another country, as if we weren't proverbial frogs, our skin sloughing off in hot water. Our challenge boils down to one thing, Roy Adams had written: the distance between what people want and what people need. Camp Hope was a prototype, a nucleus, a revolution waiting to hatch. It modeled what could be, made progress into paradise, showed how environmental living could be desired rather than feared. And while it's true, land was cheap in the Bahamas, the post-hurricane government desperate for income, any whisper of industry, Adams had also chosen to build Camp Hope in Eleutheria because the location sent a message. He wasn't afraid of hurricanes or sea level rise or anyone else's opinion. I couldn't wait to tell him that I wasn't afraid either, because in truth, it was Adams I wanted to see as much as Camp Hope. It was Adams as a repentant man, a reformed man, a visionary, who made me believe humanity could be galvanized, the planet saved. Because if Adams could change, anyone could, including me. And I'm going to pause there. That is a glimpse of Eleutheria. So in writing Eleutheria, I did a ton of research. Some might say too much research at times, into everything from the contemporary theories about protest movements to mass extinctions among animals, to I have lived and been involved with many intentional communities as a participant, and in kind of doing all this research, fieldwork, interviews, I learned a lot that I could not fit into my novel as much as I tried, and that but that I still wanted to explore. And many of the concepts that and ideas that felt like they had more, there's more room to explore them. I did that in The Last Catastrophe, in this story collection. One of the things I love about short stories is that they're a smaller container and they offer an opportunity to go deep really quickly and to get to know a group of people, a situation, really rapidly. And as someone who has many ideas, stories have been they've been great containers for that. However, the sort of overarching concept that I wanted to explore in The Last Catastrophe was the idea of global weirding, specifically. Is anyone familiar with global weirding? We've got a couple global weirders, let's say. For those of you who are new to the term, it is another way of maybe conceptualizing global warming that's less focused on temperature rise and is more focused on the way changes to our climate have thrown everything out of whack a little bit. And that can mean flowers blooming at the wrong time of year, animals migrating to a place where they shouldn't be, to, at least in my opinion, human beings who are animals doing weird things as well. For me, I think of global weirding as being an umbrella for bizarro political stuff happening, weird cultural stuff happening, and maybe just the sense of uncanniness that to me feels like it pervades so much of modern life, whether it's how we use technology, chat GPT, hallucinating, all that kind of stuff. And so the stories in The Last Catastrophe they're all pretty weird. And I think they're even weirder than aspects of the novel. I'm gonna read one story in its entirety. It's about 14 minutes long. So if you're really craving a snack, you can get one now, or you can wait 14 minutes, or you can get up during it. I'll be fine. And then after that, if you have questions, I love answering questions. So we can do a little Q&A. All right. Yes, refreshments. It's a beautiful fruit platter, so I'll hydrate while you get it. So to buy myself some time, I will ask you all, are there any fans of moose in the audience? Some moose fans? Yes, like the animal. Does anyone know for sure? Yeah, we've got a big moose fan here. Do you, in your opinion, is the plural of moose moose, or is it meese?
I mean, if you have any of them, you're just
Moose. Amen. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, the story I'm gonna read momentarily, it does focus on moose. Not many moose though, so we'll see. Yeah, I mean, people were hungry. That's okay. Moosey? Oh, I like that. Moosey.
I'm pretty sure.
It is encouraged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm? We'll give it about 30 more seconds. All right, so I'm gonna dive in about 10 more seconds. All right. So as promised, we're gonna talk moose. And this story is called The Tough Part. And yeah, after it we'll dive into some questions if you have them. All right, the tough part. There are only 5 moose left in the whole world. Someone had to save them. I was someone. So was Marissa. Also our daughter, Dottie, though in a more conceptual sense. We were gonna save the remaining moose. We were gonna make a few moose into many moose, or mooses, mices. What the fuck else did we have to do? The important thing, according to Dottie, was to keep the moose wild. People needed to stop feeding them Cokes, even though it was adorable to see a moose suction its big rubbery lips around a glass bottle, and then tilt its big goofy head back and take a swig. Pretty hilarious, actually. But people needed to stop that. They also needed to stop letting moose cool off in their swimming pools, even though it was really hot most of the time. Wicked hot, actually. The trouble was that these kinds of behaviors made moose unwild. Unwild moose got soft. Soft moose got dead. Kind of like you, says Marissa, how you got soft. She is talking to me. She is talking in her vengefully righteous yet surprisingly sensual voice about how I gave up my unsuccessful, albeit soulful, DJing career to become a cruel, self-obsessed real estate investor feeding from the poisonous hand of capitalism. I'm the one who paid for this house, I say. Marissa pretends not to hear. Instead, she paces around our comfortable and well-equipped home, muttering about how I'm no longer the man she married, that I'm a sellout, a corporate stooge, and that the man she married would be more enthusiastic about saving the remaining moose. I'm just clarifying the situation, I say. The situation, Dottie tells us, is that moose are most threatened by people because people drive cars, and moose like people, or more specifically, they like cokes and swimming pools. Are you writing this down? I am. To demonstrate my commitment to the cause, I am also admiring the moose costume she's made. It is brown and furry with a pair of highly realistic antlers. I'm supposed to share it with Marissa, each of us getting half, kind of like a divorce, says Marissa. Marissa was originally going to be the front half, standing upright, while I was going to be the back half of the moose, bending forward, my hands on her hips. Then she decided it would be weird to have my face near her butt all the time, even though butt stuff was never a big deal for us when we first got married. And really, she thinks she's just being difficult because she thinks I got soft, having given up my unsuccessful, though soulful, DJing career, even though my new job pays for her health insurance. The health of the planet, Marissa announces on cue, is more important than our own. She gestures towards the moose costume, indicating that I should put on my half. I bulk. The plan is that Marissa and I will wear the moose costume so that we can trick the 5 remaining moose into thinking we are also moose. Then we will lure those 5 remaining moose to a peopleless wilderness in Canada. Dottie says, I would do it, but I'm 4 years old. That's a good point, I reply. Marissa makes her vengefully righteous yet highly attractive face into a scowl. Have you quit your job yet? She says. I tell her I'm planning to telecommute, though quite frankly, I'm nervous about how exactly I will fulfill the mission given the constraints, how exactly I will fulfill the requirements of my occupation given the constraints of the mission. If you don't quit your job, says Marissa, I really will sign those divorce papers. Dottie, remember, once an animal is extinct, it never comes back. People get divorced, then remarried all the time, I say. Dottie, it's a long way to Canada and will probably take you many weeks, maybe months. Is that going to be a problem? Says Marissa. I don't say anything. Instead, I try to think about the importance of making sure there are moose for Dottie to see in the future, about how she deserves to see, she deserves the opportunity to show these big, weird animals to her children and to her children's children and so forth. And envisioning my descendants' future appreciation, I ease my body into the moose costume. My legs fill the furry brown legs. My head fills the furry brown head. Marissa gets in too, her legs becoming the back legs and her torso the moose belly. At last, I take a few steps forward. My back half, better half, trots along behind me, her hands grudgingly placed on either side of my waist. These antlers are quite heavy, I say. Try walking in a permanent bend, says Marissa. You're just, I pay for electricity, I say. Electricity is killing the planet, says Marissa. You look really legit, says Dottie. She claps her hands. Our first few days as a faux moose go well. Mostly because Marissa and I can't talk. Talking would clue the real moose into our human identities. Instead, we grunt and gallop around, locating the 5 remaining moose in their current unsuitable habitats, highway medians, golf courses, wastewater marshes. then herding them in the general direction of north. There's a GPS in my fake snout. I'm not a superhero. The tough part is crossing swamps. The tough part is eating pondweed for breakfast. The tough part is eating pondweed for lunch. The tough part is secretly eating the candy bar I hid in my faux moose earlobe without the real moose noticing, or more importantly, without Marissa noticing and becoming vengefully righteous about me carrying contraband that could expose our identity and thus jeopardize the mission. The tough part is avoiding hunters. The tough part is avoiding bodegas and swimming pools where the moose might succumb to human contact. The tough part is crossing roads. The tough part is Marissa's guilt-inducing, yet surprisingly sensual, breath filtering forward from the back half of our moose costume. The tough part is when there's no more pondweed to eat. The tough part is crossing roads that have turned into highways. The tough part is Marissa pinching my waist, then tapping out the beat to a track I used to spin as a DJ. She goes, mimicking Adonis and Charles B's lack of love. The tough part is when the other moose try to get away from us and each other because moose are solitary creatures and unaccustomed to traveling in herds. This is something Dottie made sure we knew. The tough part is missing Dottie and worrying about her, but also knowing she is a highly competent 4-year-old and kids mature faster these days. And really, we're doing this for her, so that she'll be able to someday show her children the moose, albeit from a safe distance, so that the moose remain wild creatures and don't get soft. The tough part is when one of the moose sees a swimming pool and dashes away, and we cannot catch up to it in time, and we have to leave it behind for fear of losing all the moose, and that now, realistically, there are only 4 wild moose left in the whole world, plus us. Maybe they won't have swimming pools in Canada. I can feel Marissa trace these words into my back later that night, or bodegas. The tough part is when all the moose get ticks because ticks like warm weather and warm weather is all we get these days. The ticks latch onto the moose and suck their blood and make the moose itch. The moose start scratching themselves. They dig their hooves against their flesh and rub themselves on trees and chain link fences and electricity pylons. And one moose, the youngest moose, still downy-nosed and knobby-kneed, he starts scratching so hard he raises whole patches of fur. But still the ticks suck. The ticks suck so much blood from the littlest moose that his body goes from brown to white. He starts to look like a ghost moose staggering north. Marissa and I scratch at the ticks too, but our faux fur is firmly glued on. Soon there are only 3 wild moose left. 3 wild, itchy moose, plus us. Maybe the ticks will die when we get to Canada. Marissa presses her finger into my back, spelling out the words. The tough part is that we are actually already in Canada. But Canada, it turns out, is a lot like everywhere else, and not what we thought it would be, which is green and wild and peopleless. There are lots of people in Canada, and roads and bodegas and swimming pools. I even recognize my own real estate signs on a few parcels of land. We'll probably get there soon. Marissa presses her fingers harder. Won't we? I say nothing because I can't speak for fear of the other moose knowing we're human, and because I suspect that Marissa already knows what I know. The tough part is knowing. Won't we? The tough part is getting very, very tired and seeing the other moose get very, very tired. So tired that one of them is too slow crossing a highway full of too fast 18-wheelers. The tough part is wanting to walk slowly into the highway myself and starting to do so, but having Marissa plant our collective back feet and then feeling terribly sad that I can't tell the woman I love that I love her and that I'm sorry I was a coward and gave up DJing. Because really, what's the point in living in any way except the way that feels right and true? We stumble onward. We are all very hungry. After a while, I take out my second and last candy bar, which I had kept stowed in my other oversized earlobe. I pass it back to Marissa. Then I hold my breath, waiting to feel the angry pinch of Marissa's disappointment, but also hoping, really hoping, that she forgives me for this and every moment in which I've ever put myself ahead of the greater good, or in which I've ever sacrificed the future for the present. I feel no pinch. Marissa eats the candy bar. The tough part is feeling happy and sad at the same time. The tough part is wondering whether we've gone through all of Canada and past the North Pole and are now circling the globe the other way, still searching for a wild, verdant place, a safe place, a place that may not exist. The tough part is looking at all the other moose and wondering whether they are even moose at all, or just other pairs of humans in moose costumes. Maybe they were never any wild moose left. Maybe we're all just people trying to show our children that we care enough about them to keep a species continuing on. The tough part is 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 continuing on. Thank you. So any new thoughts on mooses, meese, moosin? Or any questions that I can answer? Yeah. Sorry.
We, so far, like, the commission on the chart.
Oh,
And then boys.
yeah.
Something I was interested in that story is the religion of it,
Mm.
and the cause, the language is so often used that like the religion and that like sacrifice. And we heard the two sections that we read in the period. So I don't have a super specific question about it. I just am really interested in thoughts to expand on that.
Yeah. So for much of my life, I've been really interested in utopian communities and utopianism, and oftentimes utopianism intersects with religiosity in different ways. And so when I learned about the Puritan settlers who had arrived in the Bahamas with the intention of having a proto-democratic, God-loving society, I was really interested in their original aims and then what happened to them, which is that they ultimately, despite their original intentions, they became shipwreckers, basically, and ultimately were luring ships towards reefs around their around their island and collecting the treasures and supplies that would float to shore, and that really fascinated me. And I am really interested also in how things get repeated through time. And as a fiction writer, it feels often as though stories have a kind of unique ability to show repetition and to show how different moments in time can converge just because it's so pliable. And so I wanted to ultimately put the experience of those Puritans in conversation with my fictional neo-colonial environmentalists who had had these strong environmental ideals, but that perhaps would run into some certain practicalities of living on the island that would maybe distort those ideals into something that was totally the opposite from what they intended, which was to do good, theoretically. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So a lot of us read Shark Mission.
Yeah.
So there is like that element of like realism
Mhm.
in that Puritans, like that
Yeah.
stuff truly did happen. So how much of the native population, how much of that was like invented versus like inspired by real events?
The more present tense narrative you're talking about, or
Well, because you talk about like, there's none of the native stuff left in Shark Mission.
Yeah.
And this and stuff point. But like, there's nothing left because they got rid of all the pottery sharks.
Yeah. That information I was drawing on, the real information that I had about Lucayan people and the history of the indigenous people in that region. So that was all meant to be factual. Yeah. Yeah.
So I know the point of stories, especially like art fiction,
Yeah.
not have like a perfect neat ending,
Yeah.
to resound, not wrap up. But as we were talking about earlier, like you're like, oh, I wonder what did happen. Are you wondering what happened to this dysfunctional couple? Do you know? Do you not want to know?
I think they just kept repeating that same phrase infinitely. I think that one thing I wanted to show at the end of that story was a moment of grace and a moment of compassion and kindness, which is embodied in the candy bar. Because I think that's something that I try to hold on to in the face of devastating news and just the bad events that seem so much bigger than me. And I think it's something that is important to remember, because those small moments of compassion, of generosity, of kindness within our immediate sphere are really meaningful and can be what maybe sustains a community, sustains an ethos in a way that could be impactful in a bigger capacity in the long term. And it's also just makes being alive easier. And so I'm not sure what happens to this couple, but I do think that something has shifted for them. Yeah. Yeah.
So the ending, I feel like the whole thing is like alive right now.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering that you clearly you understand this situation, you're aware of what's happening, and you're also continuing to converse and write and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I feel like it's really difficult as being a college student.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
Like there's this like genocide going on, war, everything is empowering us towards this technological class. And it feels like nothing that I do in any given class actually matters. It feels like that will like everything that's very beautiful and the thing that matters. It feels like
Yeah.
And I was sort of wondering like how do you as a person that which like when you write how do you sort of suggest that people are able to engage in academia and like, get through an English degree or something like that, while also the world.
I hear you on that. I think it's really hard to wake up every day and face that bad news and to feel that sense of helplessness and powerlessness. And I think it's okay and even important to feel those feelings and to let yourself grieve and to let yourself be angry and to not pretend like that isn't happening. I think my sense, like one of the things I really believe is that being in touch with those emotions is actually really important part of making environmental progress. However, once we feel those feelings, the next step is figuring out what can I do that it in some maybe even small way can feel meaningful. And I talked about this with folks this morning, but I think being in touch with what are you good at and what do you like to do, and maybe how can that be a part of contributing, or what can I do close to home that I can see maybe the tangible results of, that can be meaningful. And I know that for me, I knew I wanted to contribute to the environmental movement in some way. And I have been to the protests, and I have had, oil executives drive by and give me the thumbs down when they saw my sign. And that felt like something, but I felt like the way that I could be most useful was maybe by writing stories, writing novels, and maybe contributing to the cultural consciousness in some small way. And that felt important. And I was going to participate in academia in a sense to gather the tools to do that as well as possible. And so my education has been about being able to show up in that way. And I also think for me, being a creative writing teacher or a teacher at all means that I get to work with students who are figuring out how to say what they want to say, and that feels meaningful. That's something that's close to home. I can see students growing in that capacity, and that makes me hang on. One last thing I would say in terms of fighting despair is that with regards to climate change, I try to spend time in nature and be able to appreciate it, experience the wonderment of it, to observe birds doing their bird things and not caring about anything else that's going on, and to just be a part of an ecosystem in a moment, that I think helps provide some counterweight to the grief. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So you're not using quotation marks.
Yeah.
Why? And less catastrophe.
Sometimes they're used. Yeah. Thank you for this question. I was actually telling Murray about a reading that I gave where this was in Idaho, someone seemed to come specifically to like rant at me about my lack of quotation marks. So I'm like a little bit on edge, but you seem like you're not mad. Okay. The lack of quotation marks was very intentional, and I will be honest with you, my agent and my editor were like, "You sure you don't want to use them, Allegra? You sure?" Because they do make dialogue a little bit clearer. However, Eleutheria is told almost entirely from the perspective of Willa Marks, this first person narrator, and I wanted it to be really clear that it's just her perspective and everything's being filtered through her, and the voices of the other characters are not necessarily like journalistic quotes from these other people. Because one of the things I was thinking about in moving from the short story Shark Fishing to this novel was, how can I do it better? And something that I reflected on was the fact that the short story really is offering up the point of view of and voice of Bohemians, who are people I am not. And the more that I sat with that, the more I felt like the way that the story was representing that community was not my it was not my job to speak for them. So I wanted to, in the novel, make it clear that we're just getting the voice and perspective of Willa. And that's one of the reasons why I don't have quotation marks. Yes.
I really appreciate how fun so much of your writing is, and I think it really comes from these intense and intensely absurd situations.
Yeah.
And circumstances that exist in ramping it up.
Mhm.
And I recently though have found that although I have a great appreciation for absurdism, what absurdist writing, I don't mesh well with it as a writer,
Okay.
even though I love it.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I guess I'm just curious about your process of creating that humor and absurdism from.
I think that humor, like so many modalities, is something that you can learn. And even if you feel like I'm not good at this now, it's something you can study just like anything else. And so I watch a lot of stand-up, and I like to study how stand-up comedians create a rhythm with their jokes and maybe call back to earlier jokes and set up punchlines. And I'm not a stand-up comedian, but I can borrow some of those tools and figure out how to slide that into my work. And I think studying writers, comedians, movies, and trying to really see what are the mechanics at play can help you find those tools so that you can use them too. I mean, I love reading Lori Moore, for instance, is someone who I think is really funny. So I learned from her, or I learned a lot about absurdity from Donald Barthelme as another person. But, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
So having written a full novel and 2 collections of short stories, is there anything kind of a note that you found that like one is able to do a lot better than the other, or vice versa?
When I'm working in a short story, I think I can experiment a lot more, a lot faster, and I can give myself really specific challenges and puzzles to solve, that maybe might not make sense for the full scope of a novel. For instance, in The Last Catastrophe, there's a story that is about a finishing school in space. And I was like, I want to write about a finishing school in space, but I want it to be in the form of an audio transcript. And so that's the form that I'm working within. And so that was the challenge of that story. I think with a novel, there's the opportunity to have characters develop in a way that can create a stronger connection between a reader and that character, so that it's just a deeper relationship and maybe potentially more of an emotional experience. But I think a good story can do that too, maybe.
The one you
Let's have a hand.
All right.